Further debate? I recognize the member for Essex.
Speaker, we are debating several schedules in a bill today. One of those schedules deals with what I will describe as drug injection sites. Some people will choose to use other language to describe these locations. Almost all of my comments today are going to be directed on something called the Community Engagement Report. The Community Engagement Report was a companion document. It is the companion document to the South Riverdale Community Health Centre Consumption and Treatment Service Review. As members of this House will recall, the South Riverdale community location was a drug injection site which was related to, some people might even suggest linked to, a deadly shooting which occurred. This particular report was prepared by Unity Health Toronto, and it's dated February 28, 2024. So it was prepared or finally finished only a few months ago. So it's very current to our discussion today. Again, it's the Community Engagement Report, the companion document to the South Riverdale Community Health Centre Consumption and Treatment Service Review, prepared by Unity Health Toronto, dated February 28, 2024. I'll make one more comment before I start referring to the report. This particular drug injection site was commenced after the community health clinic. The community health clinic pre-existed the drug injection site, and that's an important fact. So I want to provide the House with the first quote from this document, and it's as follows. Several people reported incidents of harassment, including threats and physical assault from CTS clients. Neighborhood residents, business owners, and employees emphasized that these experiences, which have been directed toward adults, teens, and young children, have taken place when walking by the CTS, in nearby alleyways, or when walking on streets close to the CTS. So, Madam Speaker, my first observation is that this community engagement report documented these incidents and that these particular sites were of grave concern with regard to these kinds of threats and physical assaults. I want to quote further from this report. Many respondents, including service users, were concerned about crowding and loitering outside of the CTS when individuals outside of the CTS were visibly intoxicated, belligerent, and acting erratically. I'll continue on, Madam Speaker. Many respondents were concerned about public drug use, including people overdosing in public, fatal and non-fatal. Drug use was observed directly outside the CTS in alleyways, on the street, in parks, and other public spaces in the neighborhood. And Madam Speaker, if that weren't concerning enough, the report goes on to say this: schools and daycares have found people using drugs in their parking lot or in their entryways. Now, Madam Speaker, that's all in the report. It's all in the community engagement report. And that, of course, is interesting information because, theoretically speaking, these drug injection sites are supposed to prevent all of that from happening. Theoretically, the drug injection sites are supposed to prevent people from taking drugs in public, but clearly they are not. Theoretically speaking, the drug injection sites are supposed to prevent people from overdosing in public, but clearly they are not. Theoretically speaking, the drug injection sites are supposed to keep the drugs away from our schools and away from our daycare centers, but clearly they are not. And people are tired of this, Madam Speaker. People are tired of it. It doesn't mean that people do not have empathy for others who are suffering from addiction. It does not mean that people do not want these addictions cured or solved. On the contrary, people want people who are suffering from addiction to get back on the road to recovery. That's what we all want. That's what all 124 members of this House want. But what we don't want is people consuming drugs near our schools, at our schools, or as this report clearly indicates, in parking lots and in the entryways to schools and daycare centers. Let me go on, Madam Speaker, to quote the report again. Respondents have also observed garbage, excrement, used condoms, discarded needles, and substances in the neighborhood, including on the streets, alleyways, schoolyards, daycare property, soccer fields, and near residents' private garages and driveways. That's a direct quote from the Community Engagement Report. Once again, Madam Speaker, the theory that has been presented is that these sites are supposed to prevent all that from happening. But clearly, it continues to happen. And in particular, it seems to be happening where the sites are located at a greater rate. That is to say, greater than in the general community. We're referring to not just antisocial behavior, Madam Speaker, but real threats to health and safety, real threats to the health of the community, including some of the youngest and most vulnerable members of our community. To quote the report again, Madam Speaker, residents and daycare staff have witnessed individuals fornicating, defecating, and urinating in public and on daycare property. Now imagine that, Madam Speaker. Imagine you're a mother or a father and you're on your way to work and you pack your kids into the car. Maybe you're driving a minivan, quality vehicle built by a North American automobile company, and you drive your children in your minivan to the daycare center, and you're confronted with people defecating, urinating, or fornicating on daycare property. Imagine that. And imagine the effect to you as a parent. Maybe your children won't see it because you'll shield them from that. But imagine the effect on the person who's running that daycare, who thought that they were going to open up a daycare center and take care of children and serve the community and serve parents, serve mothers and fathers. And instead of having to do what you wanted to do, that is to say, run a business, take care of children, now you have to deal with this kind of behavior occurring right on your property. I'll quote the report further, Madam Speaker. Many respondents were concerned about the effects on children of public drug use, disruptive behavior, and discarded equipment and drugs. Respondents reported children picking up bags of drugs. Again, Madam Speaker, that's a direct quote. Respondents reported children picking up bags of drugs. And nobody wants that happening, Madam Speaker. Nobody wants that happening near our schools. Nobody wants that happening near our daycare centers. And that's why, Madam Speaker, if this legislation is passed, we'll take steps to prevent that from happening. One of those steps I would suggest is to impose a 200-meter protection zone around every school and daycare center in the province of Ontario, because we don't want this behavior and we don't want this garbage anywhere near our schools, and we don't want it anywhere near our daycare centers. Here's another quote from the same report, Madam Speaker. Others described children as being desensitized to seeing people injecting and consuming drugs. Again, Madam Speaker, another reason why we should be imposing a protection zone around all of our schools and all of our daycare centers, because we don't want our children being exposed to this kind of activity. And there are people who will say that theoretically these sites are supposed to prevent that from happening. Well, it's clear that they're not. We don't want our children to be exposed to this. We don't want them to be desensitized to it. Rather, we want them not to be exposed to it. And that, Madam Speaker, is a very good reason for us to impose a 200-meter protection zone around every school and daycare center in the province. I'll quote further from the report, Madam Speaker. Several residents and businesses have experienced home and car thefts, property damage and break-ins. Theft has ranged from small items such as delivery packages to large items in stores. Several businesses have been burglarized multiple times, repeatedly suffering financial loss. Now, criminal behavior is not strictly isolated to drug injection sites. There's criminal behavior in other places too. But the significance of this appearing in this report is that it is being associated with the drug injection site. Let me carry on with another quote from the same report. Most business owners and employees felt that safety problems are acute, specific to the Leslieville neighborhood, and not explained by citywide trends. And that, Madam Speaker, addresses the point that I just made. Business owners who live outside of Leslieville compared the lack of sense of safety they experience at their business location with that in the broader Leslieville neighborhood, which they attribute to the CTS. And that, Madam Speaker, is the point I was making, that while crime exists everywhere, these business owners had businesses located near the zone of the drug injection site, and they also lived or had experiences outside the zone, and they could speak personally to the experience that they were going through, observing that the level of criminal activity near the drug injection site was markedly greater than elsewhere. That was observed through their own experience because they had locations, or several locations, both near and far from the drug injection site. And we're listening to those business owners, Madam Speaker. Another quote from the same report, many respondents have emphasized that there is a noticeable presence of drug selling both outside the CTS and in the neighborhood. For some, the presence of the CTS attracts drug dealers and drug users and diverts them from the downtown core. That's a direct quote, Madam Speaker. And again, it's dealing with the same point that I was making just now, that these are people who have direct experience and are speaking from the direct experience. And another quote, respondents also fear that sellers are armed and directly responsible for an increase in guns and violence in the neighborhood. And I note, Madam Speaker, that there will be some police officers here today. I understand that there are police officers from the Windsor Police Service, Kent Rice, Rick Darris, and Shannon Tennant. And I understand that there are also police officers here today from the region of Durham. And I would suggest that we could all take an opportunity to speak to our police officers, as some of us do on a regular basis, and ask them about their personal experience in dealing with these issues. Because it is, of course, often the case where police officers are called in when business owners and mothers and fathers experience the things that this report is talking about. And it's the police that have to deal with this. And they would rather be dealing with keeping people safe and, quite frankly, Madam Speaker, not inviting further drug activity, not inviting further drug trafficking, and not involving and inviting gun violence, which these drug injection sites seem to attract. I'll go further, Madam Speaker, and quote further from this report. Residents led an initiative to complete an alleyway cleanup of discarded needles, garbage, and condoms. In other words, Madam Speaker, the problem has gotten so bad that residents have to take matters into their own hands and start cleaning this mess up. And remember, Madam Speaker, the drug injection site is not supposed to cause all this, yet this is what's occurring around the drug injection sites. Theoretically, the site is supposed to prevent this from happening, but rather the opposite is happening. It is actually intensifying around the drug injection site that is being described in this report. A further quote, many children have been avoiding the alleyway behind the CTS when walking to school, and some parents do not allow their children to walk in the neighborhood alone. Some parents no longer feel comfortable sending their children to the local elementary school and have pulled their children out of the daycare. Again, that is a direct quote. And this is occurring at the drug injection site that is described in this report. It is having a negative effect on the local school. It is having a negative effect on the local daycare center. And that is yet another justification, Madam Speaker, for us to impose a 200-meter protection zone around every school and every daycare center in the province of Ontario. These schools are losing students because of the drug injection site. This daycare is losing clients because of the drug injection site. That is the upshot of this report, this community engagement report that was prepared only in February of this year. Further quotes from the same report. Parents gave examples of their children avoiding playing and spending time in the neighborhood, taking different routes home from school and avoiding eye contact with people outside the CTS. Some daycares have implemented safety measures and programming changes. One daycare has changed the location of their evacuation site to be farther from the CTS. Staff now inspect and sweep their property for needles before bringing children outside, such as for fire drills. Again, Madam Speaker, another example of the residents and the business owners of the community having to pick up after the drug injection site, having to clean up after the drug injection site. The theory is that this is not supposed to happen, that the site is supposed to prevent this from happening. But clearly, that is not occurring. The opposite is occurring. The drug injection site is intensifying this type of behavior and activity in the neighborhood. Businesses have installed, another quote, Madam Speaker, businesses have installed security cameras and many avoid keeping their doors open in the summer. Some businesses are picking up and disposing used needles on their own. Survey responses shared several accounts of individuals who have stopped visiting businesses near the CTS because of safety concerns. Madam Speaker, it's perfectly understandable when this kind of activity is occurring and your business happens to be unfortunately located near one of these sites and you are subject to all of this negative activity where you have to pick up needles and pick up garbage and put up with all sorts of what I will describe quite euphemistically as antisocial behavior, it's no wonder that people are avoiding going to those businesses. It's no wonder that people are pulling their children out of those schools. It's no wonder that people don't want to drop off their children at those child care centers. Because as a mother or a father, you don't want to expose your children to that kind of stuff. And as a business owner, you suffer. As a child care operator, you suffer. Madam Speaker, I'd like to remind all members of this House that all of the information that I presented today is not conjecture. It comes straight out of the Community Engagement Report. This is the Community Engagement Report, which is the companion document to the South Riverdale Community Health Centre Consumption and Treatment Service Review. It was prepared by Unity Health Toronto. Those are the facts. There's no denying them. I'm glad we've introduced this legislation today, Madam Speaker. I look forward to further debate and to passing this legislation because every school in Ontario and every child care centre needs to be protected from this kind of activity, and that's why we need a 200-metre protection zone around every school and every child care centre in Ontario. Thank you.
And before we move on to questions, I'd like to recognize one of the members in the Speakers Gallery, Sherry DeNovo, member for the riding of Parkdale, High Park, in the 38th, 41st Parliament. Welcome.